I am joined by Kelly McGuire, Managing Principal with ZS, coming to us from Washington, D.C., correct?
That's right. Yeah, had a little location change mid-pandemic, which is more exciting than it should have been. So
We haven't talked in like a year.
I think that's right, Jason. I think it was right around this time last year. Yeah. So,
Well, how
boy, a
have you
lot.
been?
Yeah, great. Honestly, all things considered, I'm like super stir crazy. As a road warrior, like most of your listeners, I cannot believe it's been almost a year since I've traveled for business or pleasure. I did do some traveling for the move. That doesn't count in my mind. So,
No.
but but otherwise, cannot complain. I think I even got a new job since the last time we talked, Jason. Uh,
Probably. What is ZS?
So we are a mid-sized global consulting firm, about 8,000 employees worldwide. And we really specialize in the commercial function. So for all of our clients across industry, just solutions, services that help them to optimize that commercial function. And we have analytics in our DNA. So our solutions are very much, leveraging data analytics and insights to help supercharge commercial organizations. So I was actually brought in. We have some success in hospitality, but they had a strong desire to continue momentum in that industry. And so my charge is to help build awareness and to really bring our solutions and services to the hospitality industry. Super excited because, as you can tell, between commercial and analytics, it's like right in Kelly's sweet spot. So it's been a fun year learning how I can help, despite the fact that it's been a rough year for the industry. Jason, I swear I started like in April. It was the worst week ever for the hospitality industry. Not a great week to start in a new job focused on hospitality, but I'm super optimistic for, being there to help the industry recover. So that's my spiel.
Cool. So what I caught was a couple of weeks ago, you had published an article. I forget the name of it, but you were talking about data.
Yeah.
And you were talking about what has happened to a hotel's data amid the pandemic. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think, look, we've got a lot of folks who are painfully aware of the challenges that happened during the pandemic. And the first one was that suddenly there was no historical preference or no data frame of reference to rely on. And I think what really happened in the end was we were suddenly exposed how much hospitality in general, pricing and revenue management in particular, relies on year over year historical comparisons. And that went away with the advent of the pandemic, and it hasn't returned, right? The ability to access this data, and probably won't for a while in continued volatility. So that in and of itself, I think, when, obviously everything about that pandemic shock was a shock, but I think as we're trying to return to normal, we're still struggling a little bit with, this comfort of looking back on that same time last year and thinking about what happened and what does that mean for today. We won't have that security blanket for a bit. And so it's a challenge. We're having to change our mindset.
Right. Yeah. In the article, you were talking about categorizing data, leading signal, evolving signal, stable signal, or experimental signal.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Question. I'm glad you asked, Jason. Allow me to. Yeah. No, I think what we were really trying to propose in this article was, look, if you're left with this situation where your traditional signals are not reliable or not stable, and can't support decision making, what do you do? And there's a whole universe of data. This was a problem before we entered the pandemic, but I think what we tried to do was give folks a framework for categorizing data so they would know what to do with it and how they could leverage that data to contribute to decision making. So 4 categories. Leading signals are anything that's forward looking. So we think about airlift, searches, clicks, sentiment, any of this stuff that indicates sort of exactly where we are today or looking forward, what's happening. Those are the signals now that actually probably are the most reliable when it comes to thinking about what demand might be in the future, as opposed to looking at the past. So leading, forward-looking, evolving. This was the category where we put all that historical or unstable data, occupancy data, booking pace, channel mix, cancellations, all of this stuff that changes day to day. We used to rely strongly on it. We can't now, but we will again. This is still useful stuff. So here you want to say, look, we're not relying on this, but we should be paying attention to it. We shouldn't be throwing it away. We should be thinking about, we should be preserving it and figuring out at what point we can incorporate it. Stable is just like what it says. This is stuff hasn't changed. Weather hasn't changed. Your inventory hasn't changed, the characteristics of your inventory, unless you shut some rooms down, but that's still pretty stable. So the bedrock that we've always relied on. And then there's a whole fun category of experimental stuff that we never used before, but is relevant now, may not be relevant again. Travel sentiments probably will be relevant this whole year, but once that stabilizes, it's done. COVID regulations, infection rates, all that stuff, huge impact today, may not in the future. So again, just thinking about the data in these categories lets you know what you should be relying on, what you should be watching, and what you should be playing around with to see if the impact is there.
You also talked about fine-tuning your analytical model. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's, look, it's any analytics that relied on historical data isn't going to give you reliable results in the short term. So you've pulled the rug out from under your analytical models. And so what we're suggesting in the article is you've got to take a look at the spectrum of analytics that you had been using to inform decision making, figure out which ones were impacted and make some adjustments, or potentially temporarily replace with different types of analysis. Until things stabilize again and those models can go back to being useful. So one great example is, a lot of our demand forecasting, whether it's underlying some pricing and revenue management, maybe it's labor, maybe it's operational planning, that was heavily reliable on period over period or historical data. So not going to be reliable into the future. But so what we need to kind of pivot to at this point is demand forecasting that relies on forward-looking signals. You really almost have to think that you're operating a hotel in a brand new market where your brand has never been before and there are no comps. And how would you know what to expect in terms of demand? So it becomes, because we're relying on some of these forward-looking signals, a little bit less stable. It's a little bit more like sensing than forecasting. It's going to require a lot more human judgment and hand-holding, but it is potentially a better signal of what to expect than the traditional models. Then you watch those evolving signals, and when they start to stabilize and the patterns return, you can morph back into your traditional analytical models or an adapted version of those. So it's really just thinking about what do we have to do to shore those models up in the short term.
Well, here in the U.S., I mean, it's really starting to feel like we're at the end of the tunnel, right? Especially in Texas and Florida.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a train though, Jason. It could be a train. That light could be a train. I keep saying that. No, that is a terribly pessimistic outlook. Texas and Florida. Okay.
But we're feeling good, and the poor folks in Europe, they're still locked down, a lot of them, but maybe that's going to come to an end soon. What do the hoteliers need to hang on to?
Yeah, this is what I would say. Two things. Do not discard all of the analytical capability that you've built up pre-pandemic just because it hasn't temporarily helped you support decision making. Unprecedented times, but those analytics are going to be 1,000,000% just as valuable as they were pre-pandemic as things start to stabilize, and you will not recover without some of that foundation. So that's one. And two, don't take your eye off the ball yet. I know there's a lot of optimism, but we still have a little bit more of this unusual before we get into the recovery. So keep the discipline, keep your eye on all of these signals, stay focused, and we will get through this. We will get through this, but we got to stay focused and just not throw out the baby with the bathwater in terms of our strategies.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me.
Hey, my pleasure, Jason. Always great to see you.